My name is Sandra Reed, and I'm 34 years old. Last fall, I arrived at my brother's wedding at the Drake in Chicago, dressed in my best, ready to celebrate. I gave my name at the check-in desk, but the staff stared confused. "Sorry, ma'am, you're not on the list." My stomach dropped. I called my brother, hoping for a mistake. His voice sneered through the phone. "You really think you're invited, Sandra?" The words hit like a slap. He said my lab job wasn't impressive enough for his big-shot guests. Humiliated but calm, I didn't argue. Instead, I pulled out a sealed envelope from my purse, handed it to the staff, and asked them to give it to him during the toast. Then I walked away, my heels clicking on the marble floor, leaving that night behind me. Hours later, my phone lit up, 47 missed calls from him, voicemails piling up. What was in that letter? Let's just say it turned his perfect night upside down. If you've ever been underestimated by family, hit that subscribe button and share your story in the comments. Let's talk about standing up for yourself because no one gets to decide your worth. That evening at the Drake started like a dream until it wasn't. I had spent weeks choosing the perfect outfit, a long black dress, elegant yet understated, completely different from the glittering gowns I knew the other guests would wear. The Drake's grand ballroom was a world of wealth filled with tech mogul, venture capitalists, and Chicago's elite all gathered for my brother's wedding. I felt out of place the moment I stepped into the lobby, my heels sinking into the plush carpet as I navigated through clusters of strangers in tailored suits and shimmering dresses. They laughed over champagne, their voices buzzing with talk of startups and investments. I was just Sandra, the sister who worked in a lab, not someone who belonged in their circle. At the check-in desk, I smiled and gave my name, expecting a quick nod. The staff member, a young woman with a tight bun, scanned her tablet, her brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice polite but firm. "Your name isn't on the list." My heart sank, a cold knot forming in my chest. There had to be a mistake. I asked her to check again, my voice steady, despite the growing unease. She tapped the screen, shook her head, and repeated, "No Sandra Reed here." The lobby noise faded as her words hit me. I stepped aside, pulling out my phone to call my brother. He picked up on the second ring. "What's up?" His tone was casual, almost bored. I explained the situation, keeping my voice low to avoid drawing attention. "There's a mix-up," I said. "They say I'm not on the list." A pause, then a sharp laugh cut through the line. "You really think you're invited, Sandra?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Come on, your lab job doesn't exactly scream VIP. This is a big deal. Investors, CEOs, people who matter. No offense, but you'd stick out like a sore thumb." His words sliced through me, each one a jab at the career I'd poured my life into. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white, and managed a quiet, "I see." He hung up without another word. Standing there surrounded by strangers who didn't know my name, I felt smaller than ever. My mind spiraled back to years of family dinners, where Mom and Dad would beam at my brother's every achievement. He was the golden child, the marketing director with a flashy office and a knack for charming anyone. "He's going places," Mom would say, her eyes bright with pride. "You should take notes, Sandra." My job, leading cutting-edge biotech research, never measured up in their eyes. It was always just lab work, as if my days spent unraveling genetic codes were some hobby I'd outgrow. Dad wasn't as vocal, but his silence spoke volumes. He'd nod along, never defending me, never asking about my work. Even at holiday gatherings, my brother's promotions or new clients dominated the conversation, while my breakthroughs were met with polite smiles and quick subject changes. I remembered one Christmas 2 years ago when Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Why don't you try something more ambitious?" she'd said, stirring a pot of gravy. "Your brother's closing deals with millionaires. You're still in that lab, Sandra. It's not too late to switch paths." I'd bitten my tongue, explaining for the 100th time that my research could save lives. She just patted my arm and walked away. My brother wasn't there that night, but his shadow loomed large, his success a yardstick I could never match. Even my cousin, who'd always been my ally, couldn't shift the family's focus. She'd text me later, frustrated, saying, "They're blind to how incredible you are." Now, standing in the Drake's lobby, the weight of those moments crashed over me. This wasn't just about a guest list. It was years of being dismissed, sidelined, and judged as less than by the people who should have known me best. My brother's voice echoed in my head, his laughter a reminder of every time I'd been pushed aside. The hurt burned sharp and raw, but beneath it, something else stirred. A resolve I hadn't felt before. I wasn't going to beg or plead. I wouldn't let his words define me. As I turned to leave, my hand brushed the envelope in my purse, the one I'd prepared for him. It wasn't time yet, but soon he'd see exactly who I was. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against the crisp envelope I'd brought for him. It was meant to be a surprise, something to show I cared, despite everything. But now it would serve a different purpose. I walked back to the check-in desk, my steps deliberate. The same staff member looked up, her tight bun glinting under the chandelier light. "Can you do me a favor?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "Please give this to my brother during the toast." She nodded, taking the sealed envelope with a curious glance. I didn't explain. The letter inside wasn't for her eyes. It held a message that would hit him harder than any argument could. A hint of what he'd thrown away by shutting me out. It wasn't about money or status, but it was tied to his dreams, his struggles, something he'd never expect from me. As I turned away, my mind drifted to last summer when Justin had visited my apartment. He'd sprawled on my couch sipping a beer, bragging about a villa he'd toured in the suburbs. $2 million. "Sandra," he'd said, eyes gleaming. "It's got a pool, a view, everything. One day I'm buying it." He'd talked for hours about his vision, his company soaring his name in lights that house as proof he'd made it. But then he'd let slip how his startup was bleeding cash, investors pulling back, debts piling up. "It's temporary," he'd insisted, waving it off. I'd listened quietly, knowing he'd never ask for help, especially not from me. He thought my work was trivial, my life small, yet I'd spent months planning a gift that could have changed his world. I crossed the street, the city's hum fading as I headed toward a quiet cafe a few blocks from the Drake. My boyfriend, Noah Carter, was waiting there, his familiar smile, a lifeline in the chaos of the night. I slid into the booth across from him, the warmth of the cafe wrapping around me. "What happened?" he asked, his brow furrowing as he saw my face. I told him everything. The guest list snubbed my brother's cruel words, the way he'd dismissed my entire career in a single laugh. Noah listened, his hand resting on mine, his steady presence grounding me. "He doesn't know you," he said softly. "Not the real you." I pulled the receipt from my purse, a reminder of the gift I'd planned. It wasn't just a gesture, it was something monumental, tied to everything Justin thought he deserved. I'd spent weeks arranging it, thinking it might finally bridge the gap between us. But his voice on the phone had shattered that hope. I was going to give him something big, I said, my voice tight, something that could have saved his company, given him that dream house he's obsessed with. Noah tilted his head, waiting. "But I can't now," I continued. "Not after this." The idea came to me as I sipped my coffee, the bitterness mirroring my mood. I wouldn't let my brother's rejection define me, but I could redefine what that gift meant. It wasn't his anymore. I thought of the research institute I worked with, the one racing to develop treatments for rare diseases. They needed funding, real support, not just promises. My gift could do more good there than in my brother's hands. "I'm donating it." I said the words solidifying my resolve. "All of it to the institute." Noah's eyes lit up, a proud smile spreading across his face. "That's who you are," he said. "You don't need their approval." I pulled out my phone and sent an email to my financial advisor outlining my decision. It felt right, like shedding a weight I'd carried too long. The gift wasn't about proving myself to Justin anymore. It was about doing something meaningful, something bigger than our family's petty judgments. As I hit send, a calm settled over me. I didn't know how my brother would react when he opened that letter, but I knew one thing. I wasn't the one who'd lose tonight. An hour later, at a cozy cafe, my phone started buzzing. I glanced at the screen, expecting a text from Noah, but it was my brother's name flashing over and over. I ignored the first call, then the second, letting them go to voicemail. By the 10th, I knew something had shifted. Noah raised an eyebrow across the table, his coffee untouched. "He's persistent," he said. a wry smile tugging at his lips. I didn't answer, but my curiosity nodded at me. What had changed in an hour to make Justin, who'd laughed me off so desperate back at the Drake, I could picture it unfolding. My brother, standing at the head of the ballroom, surrounded by his high-flying guests, had opened my letter during the toast. He'd probably expected a sappy note, maybe an apology for not fitting his mold. Instead, he found the truth. I wasn't just a lab worker. I was Sandra Reed, director of a biotech project worth millions, and I'd planned to give him a gift that could have changed his life. A savings account worth $5 million, $3 million to clear his company's debts, $2 million for that suburban villa he'd obsessed over. The letter didn't beg for his approval. It laid bare what he'd thrown away by shutting me out. I could imagine his face paling, his confident smirk fading as the words sank in. My phone buzzed again, a voicemail notification popping up. I played the first one, keeping the volume low. Justin's voice was frantic, nothing like the smug tone from earlier. "Sandra, what is this? $5 million. You're a director. Call me back, please." Another followed his words, stumbling. "I didn't know. Okay, I messed up. Let's talk." By the time I checked, there were 43 missed calls, a flood of texts piling up. "You can't be serious." One read, "Why didn't you tell me another? We need this, Sam. Please." The desperation was palpable, but it didn't soften me. He'd made his choice when he mocked me in front of his world. Then Mom called. I hesitated, then answered, bracing myself. "Sandra, how could you?" Her voice was sharp, accusatory. "You've been hiding this your big job, this money. You let us think you were nothing." I clenched my jaw, the familiar sting of her words cutting deep. She didn't ask why I'd kept quiet. She just assumed I'd deceived them. Dad's call came next, his tone softer, but still blaming. "You should have told us, Sam," he said. "Your brother's in a tough spot. That gift could have fixed things." I didn't argue. I just said, "You never asked about my work," and hung up. Their voices echoed years of dismissal, and I was done carrying that weight. A text from my cousin Lily Morgan lit up my screen next. She'd been at the wedding watching it all unravel. "Sam, it's chaos here." She wrote, "Justin read your letter out loud, thinking it was a toast. Now everyone's whispering. His investors are asking about you, saying they've worked with you on biotech deals. Paige is mortified, trying to laugh it off, but she's shaking. I could picture my sister-in-law, Paige Reed, in her perfect gown, forcing a smile as the room turned on her husband. The guests, CEOs, venture capitalists, were piecing it together, realizing the nobody Justin had excluded was a key player in their industry. Lily's next message hit harder. "He's panicking. Sam keeps saying he didn't mean it." I leaned back in the cafe booth, the clink of cups and soft jazz fading into the background. Noah reached for my hand, his eyes steady. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, a quiet strength settling in. For years, I'd tried to fit into my family's expectations, shrinking myself to avoid their judgment. But that letter wasn't just a message to Justin. It was my line in the sand. I didn't need their validation anymore. I switched my phone to silent, the screen dark against the table. The buzzing stopped, and with it, the weight of their demands. For the first time, I felt free, not from them, but from the version of me they'd tried to define. By morning, the news had spread beyond the wedding. My brother's carefully curated world was unraveling, and I hadn't lifted a finger to make it happen. His investors, the same ones he'd bragged about to keep me out, were now talking about me. A biotech executive who'd been at the Drake recognized my name from a research symposium we'd both attended last spring. He'd emailed his colleagues by dawn, piecing together that I wasn't just some lab tech, but the director of a multi-million-dollar project advancing gene therapies. Another investor who'd funded my institute's trials connected the dots and sent a group chat message that spread like wildfire. Justin Reed's sister is Sandra Reed. He called her a nobody. The whispers turned to outright criticism, with some calling him arrogant for dismissing someone so pivotal in their field. At a breakfast meeting, one of Justin's key backers, a venture capitalist with a stake in his startup, pulled him aside. "You didn't know your own sister's running a biotech empire," he asked, his tone sharp. Justin stammered, trying to downplay it, but the damage was done. By noon, 2 investors had emailed to pause their funding, citing concerns about his judgment. They didn't just see a family spat. They saw a man who couldn't read people who'd alienated a major player in an industry they valued. Justin's charm, usually his greatest asset, faltered under their scrutiny. His company, already stretched thin, teetered as the news rippled through Chicago's tech scene. Paige felt the fallout too. She'd always been the polished wife hosting dinners for Justin's clients and mingling at industry galas. But now invitations dried up. A charity event she'd helped organize dropped her from the guest list with the coordinator, citing recent events as too distracting. Paige tried to save face, posting upbeat photos online, but the comments were brutal. "Did you know about Sandra?" One read another. "Your husband messed up big time." She stopped posting by midday, her silence louder than any caption. The social circle she'd worked so hard to join was closing ranks, and she was left on the outside tied to Justin's mistake. I was at home that morning sipping tea with Noah when I told him what I'd done. "I donated it," I said, my voice steady. "The entire savings account, $5 million, to the Research Institute." Noah leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "All of it?" he asked, not doubting, just confirming. I nodded. $3 million could have saved Justin's company, and $2 million would have bought his dream villa. But it's not about him anymore. It's going to fund clinical trials for kids with rare diseases. I explained how the Institute had been struggling, how my donation could push their work forward, maybe even save lives. Noah reached for my hand, his grip warm. "You're incredible," he said. "This is bigger than any of them." I hadn't checked my phone since silencing it the night before, but Noah had been scrolling through updates from mutual colleagues. He showed me a post on a biotech group social media page shared by a researcher I'd worked with. "Big congrats to Sandra Reed," it read. "Newly appointed director of our gene therapy project, now backed by a massive donation to accelerate trials." The comments were flooded with praise, but some mentioned the wedding. Heard her brother didn't invite her. One wrote, "Talk about a misstep. Another Justin Reed startup is tanking while Sandra's changing the world." The posts weren't cruel, but they were blunt, highlighting how Justin's actions had backfired in the worst way. I didn't feel triumphant reading those comments, just a quiet resolve. For years, I'd let my family's judgment define my worth, measuring myself against Justin's flashy success. But now the world was seeing what I'd always known. My work mattered, not because of their approval, but because of the lives it could touch. Noah set his phone down, his voice gentle. "They're finally catching up to you," he said. I smiled, not because Justin was faltering, but because I was standing taller than ever, free from the shadow I'd lived under for so long. 3 days later, I walked into my parents' living room. The air was like thick with tension, the kind that settles when a family knows they've crossed a line but can't admit it. Dad had called the night before, his voice heavy, asking me to come talk. "We need to sort this out, Sam," he'd said, not explaining what this was. I agreed, not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted to face them one last time to say what I'd held back for years. They were all there. Mom, Dad, Justin, Paige, and even Lily, sitting quietly in the corner. Justin looked like he hadn't slept his tie. Loosened his eyes, darting to me and away. Paige sat stiffly beside him, her arms crossed, avoiding my gaze. Mom stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid, while Dad sat in his armchair, rubbing his temples. I took a seat across from them, my hands steady in my lap. No one spoke at first, the silence heavy with expectation. Justin broke it. "Sam, I didn't mean it." He started, his voice low, almost rehearsed. The guest list was tight. "You know that. I didn't think you'd care." His words were flimsy, a weak attempt to rewrite what he'd done. I raised an eyebrow, letting him squirm. "You didn't think I'd care," I said, my tone calm but cutting. "You laughed at me, Justin. You said my work was nothing, that I didn't belong with your important friends." Mom jumped in, her voice sharp. "Sandra, you should have told us you were some big-shot director. We thought you were just tinkering in a lab." Her words stung, but they weren't new. She'd always seen my career as a hobby, something to pass the time until I found a real path. I looked at her unflinching. "I tried, Mom." I said, "Every time I talked about my work, you changed the subject. You praised Justin's deals, his clients, his life, Never mind. Dad cleared his throat, trying to mediate. Let's not point fingers, Sam. He said, your brother's company is struggling. That money you mentioned in the letter, it could have helped him. I took a deep breath, ready to lay it all bare. I plan to give you a savings account, Justin, I said, locking eyes with him. $5 million. $3 million to clear your company's debts. $2 million for that villa you wouldn't stop talking about. I wanted to support you even after everything. His jaw dropped, and Paige gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But I didn't give it to you. I continued my voice study. I donated it to the research institute I work with. It's funding trials for kids with rare diseases, something bigger than your startup or your dream house. The room went silent, the weight of my words sinking in. Justin's face reened, his hands clenching. You gave it away, he sputtered. Sam, that was mine. You can't just I cut him off. It was never yours, Justin. It was my choice, and I made it. Mom stepped forward, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Sandra, we're family. You can't turn your back on us like this. I shook my head. I'm not turning my back. I'm setting a boundary. You chose to push me out to make me feel small. I'm done letting you define me. I stood my decision final. I came here to be clear, not to fix things you broke. I walked out the door, clicking shut behind me, their stunned faces etched in my mind. Later that evening, Lily texted me, filling in the aftermath. They turned on Justin after you left. She wrote, Mom yelled at him for being so careless, said he embarrassed the family. Dad just shook his head, didn't say much. Paige walked out crying. Lily added that Mom tried to call a truce, insisting we could still work it out, but the cracks were too deep. Justin's mistake wasn't just about me. It had exposed his arrogance, his need to control how the world saw us. The family was unraveling, and he was at the center of it. Back at my apartment, I sat with Noah, the weight of the day settling. I told him about the meeting, how I'd finally spoken my truth. He listened, his presence steady as always. You did what you needed to, he said, his voice warm. You stood up for yourself, Sam. That's enough. I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years, like I'd shed a burden I'd carried too long. The family I'd fought to please was behind me, and for the first time, I was okay with that. A year later, I stood in my new office overlooking Chicago. The skyline sparkled below, a reminder of how far I'd come since that night at the Drake. My work had taken me to new heights, leading a biotech firm that was making headlines for its breakthroughs in gene therapy. But the real victory wasn't the corner office or the awards on my desk. It was the life I'd built, one where I no longer chased my family's approval. Justin's world, meanwhile, had crumbled. He had learned the truth about my donation when the Research Institute announced a $5 million grant in my name. His company, already fragile, couldn't survive the loss of investors who'd pulled out after the wedding fiasco. By spring, it was bankrupt, leaving him with nothing but debts and a tarnished reputation. Paige, once his biggest cheerleader, grew distant. She blamed him for the social fallout, for the whispers that followed them at every event. Their marriage strained under the pressure, with arguments spilling into late-night calls that Lily overheard and shared with me. He's not the same, she texted. Paige keeps talking about leaving. My life, though, was moving forward. Noah and I planned our wedding at a stunning lakeside venue, a place that felt like a dream. White flowers, soft music, and a small circle of people who truly knew us. When Mom called her voice, hesitant, asking to attend, I listened quietly. Dad followed with a text, and even Justin sent a message claiming he wanted to make things right. I read their words, but they felt hollow, like echoes of a past I'd outgrown. I'm keeping this day for us, I told Noah, who nodded his hand, squeezing mine. I sent a polite but firm reply to each of them. No invitations, no exceptions. Lily was the only one I welcomed her support, unwavering through it all. The wedding was everything I'd hoped for. I walked down the aisle in a dress that felt like me. Simple, elegant, no pretense. Noah's smile grounded me, his vows a promise of a life built on mutual respect. Our friends, colleagues, and a few mentors from my institute filled the room with warmth. There was no shadow of my family's judgment, no need to prove myself. As we danced under the stars, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. Looking back, I learned something profound that night at the Drake, something I want to share with you. Self-respect matters more than clinging to toxic family ties. For years, I let their voices drown out my own believing I had to earn their pride. But the moment I chose myself, my work, my values, my boundaries, I found freedom. I don't regret walking away, not from the money, not from them. My donation saved lives. My career changed the world. And my life with Noah is full of love that doesn't demand I shrink myself. To everyone listening, thank you for hearing my story. It's not just mine. It's a reminder that you don't have to stay in spaces that diminish you. If you've got a story like this one where you chose yourself over expectations, share it. Let's lift each other up. Celebrate the strength it takes to walk away and build something better. I'm happier now than I ever thought I could be, and I know you can find that.